There were two things that happened to me that inspired me to play the double bass. The first thing was hearing Danny Thompson, the English double bass player, on a record called Hounds of Love by Kate Bush. And at the same time I also heard him on a track called The Ink in the Well by David Sylvie, and those two things struck me very strongly. I'd never heard a sound like that, and it resonated very deeply with me straight away. And I'd been looking to try and find something expressive to do with my life for 4 or 5 years since I'd left school, but struggled. But when I heard that, sort of a light came on, really, and I immediately fell in love with Danny's sound. And at the same time, I was in Paramount Bookshop on Shude Hill in Manchester, and there was a little box of pound books, and there was a picture of a double bass with this big hand on it and this paperback, and it said autobiography, and I thought it looks quite interesting, and it was Beneath the Underdog by Charles Mingus. So I handed over my quid and got the book, went home and sort of read it in one night, you know, just marvelling at the intensity and the madness of this guy's life, and I just thought, wow, you know, I've got to get a double bass. This is immediately going to start happening to me, of course, in Manchester if I buy a bass. And so I bought Lute a couple of days later, and for 275 English pounds, I bought a plywood practice bass off somebody from the Halle Orchestra in Bowden. And I mean, it was a dog of an instrument made of the cheapest woods, and you know, you played 2 notes and your fingers fell off. But nonetheless, I had a bass, and I spent about 5 years scuffling wildly trying to catch up with everyone else that had been through the Royal Northern, taking every single gig I possibly could, because it felt to me that's where I was really learning the most and cutting my teeth. And a friend of mine was a big fan of ECM records, and he did me lots of sort of mixtapes that had players like Gary Peacock and Dave Holland and Miroslav Vitous and Paul Chambers and Ron Carter and various other people. Music for me, when I started to learn music, was just purely about sound and trying to find sound and find things, and I didn't understand notation or the classical way of interpreting, you know, a page of music or any of that stuff. I mean, it was a very exciting time as well in Manchester, sort of the early to mid 90s. There was a real explosion, you know, everything that was coming out of the kind of, you know, sort of acid house and ecstasy movement. Electronic music was blowing up all over the place, and some really, really wonderful sort of music emerged at the time. I cut my teeth running a jam session on a Monday night at Night and Day Cafe, which at the time was still a chip shop with a tiny stage in the front window. In fact, that's where there was about 3 people in one night, and I was playing away, and one of those people happened to be Graham Massey, who took my number and gave it to Andy and Lou, and that's how I got the shout for Lamb in the first place. I auditioned in 1996 upstairs at Sankey Soap in Manchester, and obviously got the job, and I've been touring with them ever since. But I've been on 4 of their 5 albums, and I've done every gig that they've ever done. Lamb was a very challenging musical environment for me, because there wasn't a lot of reference really for double bass and electronic music, and so I had quite a blank canvas to try and explore ways of making that sonically fit within quite a dense electronic framework that already had quite a lot of sub bass and stuff like that in it.
Jon Thorne is an integral part of Lamb, for sure. I mean, he did our first ever show. We were terrified because we'd just made this record in the studio and we'd never played any of it live, you know. And I don't know, he just kind of fitted in from the word go.
Well, Jon Thorne has been in every Lamb show we've ever played, probably over 1,000 shows. over the last 10 years, and he is an absolute lunatic. He's just a fantastic musician, and he also reads music, which I don't. If if Lamb are dealing with a string section, for example, who all want it written down, Johnny can score and stuff like this. And he's almost like our lead guitarist as well, because he's playing right up the neck. We've got a custom-made electric double bass, which has got, then loads of effects and sounds and stuff. I mean, a real double bass sounds fantastic, but on a big stage, a double bass is lost because you just can't hear it.
The thing with Johnny is that he's the most amazing bass player, and he's just such a brilliant human being to have around. He's got a terrible sense of humour.
I've deliberately tried to keep a very open mind to all kinds of music and to take double bass wherever I felt I wanted to take it. I think the interesting thing with Lamb was the way Andy programs is highly unusual, and conventional bass playing just wasn't really going to work. Obviously with electronic music there's no latency, but with a double bass it takes some time for notes to grow and develop, so there's movement within the bass sound, and it sort of led to me playing more melodically and finding sort of counter melodies to Lou a lot of the time. I was given freedom to explore and expand on the bass lines and just try and find a voice within the group. It sort of reached its apotheosis on Fear of Fours, where I was given a tremendous amount of freedom, and I went into the studio and played a lot of bass, and Andy sort of edited out of many hours of bass playing on each track, where he just basically said, improvise. That was probably my strongest individual musical statement in the band's history on that album, because I was mixed very loud and I had a very deep and resonant instrument at the time, and it came through very strongly, and I played a lot of quite melodic sort of counterpoint on it. On Lamb's latest album, 5, I played on 6 or 7 of the tracks, and each of them required a different approach. The track Itch was one where I was given carte blanche freedom. There's a track called Strong the Root, where there's a sort of little coda at the end where I came up with a very sort of Ron Carter kind of mid-60s sort of jazz bass line. But there were other times where I was very much playing in with the sub bass and layering up the bass that was already there that Andy had programmed. I've got a couple of projects of my own music which I'm starting to write for. One of which is I want to write an album for Mark Burgess, the singer out of the Chameleons, who are like my all-time favourite band. And he's sort of tentatively given me the nod for that, so hopefully that's going to come to fruition. I wrote a rock album with Steve Hewitt, the drummer and singer, which is a band called Love Amongst Ruin. I'll be writing some new songs with him soon. I've been playing extensively with a very talented young artist called Jon Smith, sort of folk-esque singer-songwriter. I never know how quite to describe people. He sits down with a guitar and sings beautiful songs. Lamb's new album's come out, and we've just started what looks like a 2-year cycle of touring, which is very exciting as well. I'm hopefully going to be able to slip in some gigs with Jon Smith in the middle of that as well. In November, I realised a very strong ambition of mine, which was to write an album to feature Danny Thompson, who's sort of my mentor figure really in music. And that's called Watching the Well, and that's a 12-part orchestral suite of music which features Danny and also has some wonderful musicians on it. Stuart McCullum, the guitarist out of the Cinematic Orchestra, and Gilad Atzmon, the saxophonist from London, and Dave Walsh, my friend the drummer, my wife Jon Thorne doing all the orchestral arranging and singing on it, sort of multi-tracked as a choir. It was originally a commission for Manchester Jazz Festival in 2007, and after 3.5 years of recording process, it's become an album. So yeah, there's going to be plenty to be getting on with, for sure.